This morning, Tesla dropped their Q2 2022 production and delivery numbers, which honestly, I have to admit, were a bit better than I was anticipating because there was a ton of GigaFactory shutdowns in Shanghai that lasted several weeks, and only recently in the month of June did Tesla finally get Giga Shanghai back up to fully operational to the run rate they were before the shutdowns. So everyone kind of knew that the numbers were not going to be as good as they theoretically could have been, but there's still some silver linings in these numbers that I wanted to highlight. So in total, they delivered a little bit over 254,000 vehicles, but ultimately what probably should matter more is production. They built over 258,000, and the reason production likely matters more is because we know with the tremendous backlog of orders there already is for all Teslas, basically all of the vehicles they have yet to deliver are pending delivery, but they will be sold. Tesla does not have a demand problem, so every one of those vehicles they build is going to be sold likely with a pretty thick profit margin. And the silver lining here is that within the same period last year, where Tesla did not have any Gigafactory shutdowns or lockdowns or those kinds of things, they delivered just over 200,000 vehicles in Q2 of 2021. So despite like a 6-week shutdown and Shanghai taking a couple more weeks to ramp back up, they were still able to grow production and deliveries by around 25%, basically with their hand tied behind their back. So I consider that a major win, and if we compare it to last quarter's numbers, we get a better idea of the current run rate of their factories when they're fully operational. You know, in Q1, they posted over 300,000 vehicle deliveries, but if you look into the specific models, in Q1, they delivered around 14,000 Model S's and X's, and in Q2, they delivered over 16,000 Model S's and X's. So, because Gigafactory Shanghai was the only factory impacted by the shutdowns, the Model 3 and Y production went down, but not the S and X. That actually increased quarter over quarter by a little bit. However, those profit margins on those vehicles are much thicker than that of the margins on the Model 3 and Y. So even though it doesn't account for a lot of their total vehicle deliveries, I think it may overall push revenues higher, and that's part of the reason why I believe Tesla has such an insane lead on everybody else in the electric vehicle space, because they're able to ramp so successfully while also securing profit margins, which is not just a shareholder perspective of, oh yes, greedy business continues to be greedy. It's more like it secures the future of the company, so they're able to continue scouting for new Gigafactory locations, expand into new markets like getting into the mining business and finding ethical and sustainable ways of mining new materials for their batteries. So it's a good look for the future, and I happen to disagree a little bit when Elon was kind of talking about the risk of bankruptcy in recent interviews he was doing with the Tesla owners of Silicon Valley. I mean, nothing's impossible. There's still a chance of Tesla going bankrupt, but I think Elon is mostly just kind of lighting the fire under the employees' seats a little bit and just trying to avoid complacency and prevent people from taking things for granted. Yes, they're laying off a lot of employees right now, but I think that's mostly Tesla just trying not to get too comfortable with their success, and they likely still think there's a decent chance of the recession causing a total economic collapse and the US dollar continuing to weaken. Not to mention Tesla's Bitcoin investment is likely not doing too hot right now either. So I appreciate Tesla for still being lean and still trying to lower operating expenses whenever possible, but ultimately looking at their balance sheet, which we will be able to dive into the earnings report on July 20th, they still have a ton of cash in the bank and very little debt compared to any other automakers. So that's why I don't really think there's a genuine risk of bankruptcy, especially when the profit margins are this good on their current vehicles and demand is so high. But what I'm most interested in this next earnings call has to be the production capacity on GigaTexas and GigaBerlin. You know, they were technically operational during the last earnings call, but they just said early ramp up in the shareholder deck. They didn't want to go into details on how many vehicles were actually being built, but via Twitter, they've been happy to share on GigaBerlin, like, yeah, we built over 1,000 Model Ys within a single week, and they expect that ramp up to continue. So I'm hoping on July 20th, they'll start to tell us what the current run rate is of GigaTexas and GigaBerlin. I think that would be fairly exciting, and the real silver lining, or honestly, I should say gold lining here, is despite a very difficult quarter with a lot of shutdowns on their largest factory producing their most vehicles, Tesla mentioned that in the month of June, they produced more EVs than they ever have in previous months. And a little bit of a spoiler for you, Tesla builds more EVs than any other company, which means in the month of June, there were more Teslas built, and that probably means more electric vehicles built than any other month in automotive history, which is insanely good. And I think the reason they were able to achieve that is Giga Shanghai finally coming back to full capacity, and now GigaBerlin and GigaTexas starting to produce in meaningful volume. If you keep up with Tobias Lind, you'll know that they've actually started building long-range Model Ys out of GigaBerlin as well, alongside the Performance, and Joe Tegmeyer over at GigaTexas is counting over 100 Model Ys being built a day, so they're likely coming pretty dang close to that 1,000 a week and over 50,000 vehicles built run rate at GigaTexas as well. So these new factories, only within the first couple quarters of them being online, are already starting to show meaningful growth, and because they're next generation factories, that means they can ramp up faster, they can ramp up more profitably because they've simplified the assembly line and there's less parts that need to be all moved around like they do in Fremont. They're using the next generation paint shop and all that, so I think this is a great sign for Tesla despite the context of the shutdowns that impacted GigaFactory Shanghai. But honestly, my only wish is that with these production and delivery numbers, they could get a tad more specific. It's still kind of annoying to me that all they tell us is, here's how many Model S's and X's, and here's how many Model 3s and Ys. Like, Tesla is building at such high volume now, I think it'd be kind of nice if they reported, here's exactly how many vehicles we exported from Shanghai versus delivered locally, here's how many we delivered in North America, and here's how many Model 3s we delivered versus Model Y. Like, you could separate all of this data, and I don't think it would make Tesla look bad in any way, shape, or form. Like, oh, okay, Model X doesn't sell at the same volume as Model S. Who cares? These vehicles are selling at extreme volume, and they're very, very profitable. The Model Y became the best-selling car in Norway recently, and the Model 3 globally entered the top 10 best-selling cars in the world, sitting at 9th place, and that's just coming out of 2 factories. Once the Model Y is fully ramped at Berlin, Shanghai, Fremont, and Texas, that I think is easily going to beat the Model 3 in global deliveries. So the future is very bright for Tesla. I don't think they need to hide that kind of data anymore, but for tradition's sake, I guess they just keep bunching them together into these 2 categories. But what do you guys think of the production and delivery numbers? Were they a disappointment to you? Were they over what you expected? Feel free to let me know your thoughts down below. And thank you to everyone on Patreon supporting this channel directly. Seriously, helps us out a ton, as does just watching these videos. It helps pay for the vehicle that hopefully we're taking delivery of in this quarter. So I didn't get to be a part of Q2 deliveries, unfortunately, but here's hoping when Tesla reports Q3 numbers, I'll be reporting them from inside my Model 3. Take care and have an excellent rest of your day.